My name is Maren Whitfield and I'm 39 years old. 3 weeks before Christmas, I was standing in a hospice hallway in my scrubs when my phone buzzed with a message from my sister. "You're not welcome at Christmas. It's only for parents now." My family had voted on me the way a zoning board votes on a variance, and nobody thought I deserved so much as a phone call first. I read it twice, slid the phone into my pocket, and finished my shift, because that's what nurses do. Then I drove home, sat at my little kitchen table, and smiled in a way that would have worried my sister if she'd seen it. I did not beg. I did not argue. I opened my laptop and booked a balcony suite on a cruise to the Caribbean, sailing straight through Christmas Day. But the cruise isn't the story. What my family did when the photos went up, and what I learned they'd been planning behind my back for 6 weeks, that's the part one still can't tell without my hands going still. Welcome back to Behind Closed Doors Revenge podcast. This is the channel where women finally say out loud the things they carried in silence: family, betrayal, and the quiet moments that rearrange a whole life. If this one speaks to you, drop a comment, and stay to the end, because the part where I got the key back isn't the part you're expecting. To understand that text, you have to understand my days. I've been a hospice nurse in Millbrook, Wisconsin, for 15 years. When somebody's mother is dying at 2 a.m, I'm the one they call. I sit with families in kitchens that smell like burnt coffee and fear and tell them, gently, what the next few hours will hold. I'm good at it, not because I'm soft, but because I'm steady. Dying people don't need you to cry with them. They need you to stay in the room. That November I was spending 3 afternoons a week with a patient named Eleanor Voss, 83, a retired high school geometry teacher with a tongue like a compass point, precise, and it would puncture you if you got too close. No husband, no children, a bookshelf organized, she told me, by grudge, dear, the only honest filing system. The first week she looked me up and down and said, "You've got caretaker shoulders. Coat hanger shoulders. Everybody hangs something on you." I liked her immediately. Eleanor did the crossword in ink and graded my small talk like homework, a B-, most days, conversationally competent, emotionally withholding. But when the room went quiet she watched me the way a teacher watches the kid who tests well and eats lunch alone. One afternoon she asked, out of nowhere, who took care of me at Christmas. I laughed, fluffed her pillow, and changed the subject, which, for the record, is what caretakers do instead of answering. She let it go that day. She wouldn't always. Weeks later, in that same room, Eleanor would say the sentence that ended up saving my life, and I mean that with a nurse's precision, not a poet's. "But we're not there yet. First you need to meet my family, because you can't understand what they took from me until you see everything I'd been quietly handing them for years. Here's the map. My mother, Diane, is 68, widowed 7 years, and the unofficial backbone of the fellowship committee at Trinity Methodist. My brother Neil is 42, a claims actuary in Madison, an hour away, married to Paige, who runs the school fundraising calendar with the discipline of a small logistics company. Their kids are Harper, 13, and Miles, 9. My sister Renee is 35, lives 35 minutes off in Waunakee, and has 3 kids, Ivy, 8, Beckett, 6, and little Josie, who's 3 and calls me Aunt Maren, which I have never once corrected. And then there's the lake house. My father built it with his own hands on Heron Island, an hour and a half north, back when we were kids, a low gray cottage on Lake Michigan with a screened porch that faces the water like it's waiting for something. Every Christmas of my life happened in that house. I'm the one who put up the tree the first weekend of December. I baked the ham. I bought the stocking gifts marked from Santa so Renee could sleep in. When Mom's knees gave out, I'm the one who drove her up there with the good tablecloth folded on my lap like a flag. Last year's Whitfield family Christmas card was a photo of the 5 grandkids on that porch. No adults. Just the kids, the lake, and the words "the Whitfield family" in gold script. I remember holding that card and noticing something small and cold settle in my chest. I wasn't in the picture. Neither was anyone who couldn't reproduce. Nobody thought that was strange. I told myself it was sweet. That's the thing about a family like mine, the eviction doesn't start with a text. It starts with a Christmas card everyone calls adorable. I should tell you the part one don't usually tell. I got married at 30 to a good man named Mark. From 32 to 35, we went through 3 rounds of IVF. 3 Decembers in a row I sat in a clinic parking lot listening to a nurse, someone with my own job, my own careful, steady voice, tell me it hadn't worked. The marriage didn't survive the 3rd round. Nobody cheated. We just ran out of language for each other. He remarried. I hear he's happy, and most days I even mean it when I say I'm glad. What survived was a savings account I'd opened during the 1st round and labeled someday. By the time the divorce was final it held $9,600, and I couldn't touch it and couldn't close it. It just sat there, a nursery with the lights off. Here's what I did with all that grief, because I'm a caretaker, and caretakers metabolize pain into chores. I became the family's fixer. Every school pickup Renee couldn't make. Every form mom needed a nurse's eyes on. Every birthday cake, every airport run, every holiday hosted and wrapped and cooked and scrubbed clean afterward. If I couldn't give the family children, I would pay my dues some other way. Nobody ever said that out loud. They didn't have to. I'd written the contract myself and signed it alone. But there was one more payment, bigger than all the rest, that nobody in that group chat knew about. One thing I'd been quietly doing for 6 years that made what happened next almost funny. Almost. We'll get there. First, the text. December 3rd, a Wednesday 4:40 in the afternoon. I was in the hallway outside a patient's room, charting, when the group chat lit up. The chat is called Whitfield Christmas with a little tree emoji, and Renee runs it the way Paige runs the fundraising calendar. Her message was long, but it had clearly been drafted and revised, which somehow made it worse. She wrote that the lake house had felt chaotic last year, that the kids' magic needed to come first this time, and that after talking it over, remember those words, they'd decided to try something new. Christmas at the lake house this year would be for parents and kids only. And then, in its own little bubble, the sentence I will be able to recite on my deathbed, it's only for parents now. She added a heart. She added, you understand, right? You're the cool aunt. We'll do lunch in January. Lunch in January. 36 Christmases in that house, and I'd just been rescheduled like a dental cleaning. I stood in that hallway and watched the reactions roll in. Neil gave it a thumbs up. Paige posted a gif of a cartoon Santa clapping. And my mother, whose porch lights I hang every November, whose full medication list lives folded in my purse, said nothing. Not a word. Silence in my family is a vote. I typed a reply and deleted it. Typed another, deleted that. For drafts, each smaller than the last, until what was left was nothing at all. I put the phone away and went back in to check a stranger's morphine pump. A stranger, by the way, whose family had driven 300 miles to be with her that week. I noticed. Nurses notice everything. It's a curse. I'd love to tell you I went scorched earth that night. I didn't. I did something more embarrassing. I negotiated. The next evening I called Renee, and I hate telling this part, because you're about to hear a grown woman bid on a folding chair. I offered to cook the whole dinner and leave before it was served. I offered to stay at a motel in Two Rivers and slip in Christmas morning just to watch the kids open their stockings, the stockings I fill, incidentally, though I didn't say that. I heard myself getting smaller with every offer, like a price tag being crossed out again and again at an estate sale. Renee was sweet through the entire call, which is how she wins. It's not personal, she said, in the voice she uses on Josie when Josie wants a snack before dinner. It just confuses the kids' magic, having extra adults hovering. It's just how families work now. Extra adults. Sit with that phrase the way I had to. 39 years old, and I'd been reclassified as surplus furniture. Then, because Renee always says one sentence too many, she added, honestly, we all talked about it and everyone agreed it's healthier. I went still. When did everyone agree, Renee? A pause. The exact pause a nurse hears when a family member is about to lie about how the fall really happened. It came up organically, she said. Organically. In my family, nothing has ever come up organically except cancer. I said goodnight, hung up, and stood in my kitchen doing the thing I do at work, reading the chart. Somewhere, there had been a meeting about me. I just couldn't see the room yet. Saturday I drove the 15 minutes to my mother's house with a casserole, because in the Midwest you cannot confront anyone without a covered dish. Mom was at the counter addressing Christmas cards. This year's card, I noticed, was the grandkids again on the lake house porch. She wouldn't hold my eyes. "Don't make waves, honey," she said before I'd even taken my coat off. "Renee's under so much pressure with the little ones. It's one Christmas. One Christmas. That's what people say when it isn't theirs." I asked her, quietly, if she'd been in the room when the new rule was invented. She straightened the cards into a stack. "It's what's best for the children," she said, which is the church version of pleading the fifth. And I understood something then, watching her line up those envelopes for the ladies of Trinity Methodist. My exile wasn't really about hovering ants. It was about the seating chart at her church, where a woman's worth is counted in grandchildren the way a farmer counts acres. Just that week, at the Advent planning meeting, Linda Presswood had asked her, loudly, "I'm told, how many grandbabies now, Diane?" "Five's a good number. 5 fits on a card. A divorced daughter with no stroller does not fit on a card." On my way out I set the casserole on the counter beside her open mail, and my eye caught a bank statement with a line item I knew better than my own pulse, because it was mine. I looked away fast, out of habit. 6 years of habit. And that right there is the part of this story I'd been keeping even from myself. 6 years ago, my father died of a heart attack at 64, in the garage, with the radio on. After the funeral, my mother sat me down at her kitchen table, just me, the nurse, the one who handles things, and showed me a folder. Dad had taken a home equity loan against the lake house to cover a bad roof, a worse furnace, and, we later pieced together, some quiet help he'd given his brother, who'd gone under in a bad year for the dairy business. With his pension gone, Mom couldn't cover the payment, the taxes, and the insurance. The lake house, the porch, the dock, every Christmas we'd ever had, was maybe 14 months from being sold out from under us. She cried into a dish towel. Then she asked me for 2 things, help, and secrecy. If your brother and sister find out the house isn't free and clear, it changes how they see your father. Let his memory stay whole. I was 33, still in the middle of the shots and the waiting rooms, already suspecting how that particular story would end. I had no children to save for, a steady paycheck, and a hole in my chest exactly the size of being needed. Of course I said yes. I saw the red flag. I'm not a fool. I even wrote the number down and made her sign a little paper. Nurse habit, everything gets charted. Then I set up the autopay. $640 a month, the first of every month, loan and taxes and insurance rolled together, 72 payments and counting, more than $46,000 over 6 years, out of a nurse's salary, in perfect secret, while Neil believed the house was paid off free and clear and Renee planned menus for a kitchen she thought cost nothing. So when my sister wrote that Christmas at the lake house was only for parents now, here's the arithmetic nobody else in that group chat could do. I had just been banned from the only house in the family that had my name on the bills. The room where the meeting happened found me by accident, the way these things do. 9 days after the text, my niece Harper called me on video to show me her science fair volcano, because 13-year-olds still like you even when their parents have voted you off the island. Mid-eruption, she said, casual as a weather report, Mom said you're not coming since Halloween. Did you really tell Grandma Christmas is dumb now? I kept my voice level. 15 years of practice. Since Halloween, sweetheart? Yeah, they have a whole planning chat. Mom's always typing in it. It's called Christmas planning. She wrinkled her nose. You're not in it, I think. No. I was not in it. After we hung up I sat very still and did the math I'd been avoiding. It was December 12th, Halloween was 6 weeks back, which meant that all through November, while I hung Mom's porch lights, while I drove her to her cardiology follow-up, while I picked up Ivy and Beckett from school on Renee's long Tuesdays, there had been a second room, with all of them in it, deciding I was clutter. And the detail that took my breath, my mother was in that chat. 6 weeks. She'd known for 6 weeks and let me climb her ladder and check her heart and say nothing. I'd assumed her silence in the family thread was cowardice in the moment. It wasn't. It was policy. You can survive being wounded by your family. What buckles your knees is learning the wound was scheduled, put on a calendar, discussed, agreed to, while you were out buying their stocking gifts. That night I called no one. I went into work early. Eleanor took one look at me and put down her crossword. Sit, she said. You're leaking. That was her word for feelings. So I sat, and for once I told a patient the truth about my own life, the text, the second chat, the 6 weeks. Eleanor listened the way she must have watched students take exams, hands folded, missing nothing. Then she told me her own story, flat, like a proof. 51 years teaching other people's children. Bought half of them their college textbooks. Hosted Thanksgiving for 30 years, the good silver, the folding chairs, all of it. Then her hip went, and she couldn't host, couldn't drive, couldn't be useful. Count the visitors, Marin, she said, nodding at the door of a room I'd sat in 3 afternoons a week. I'd met exactly one great niece, once, who stayed 20 minutes and took a photo of the two of them for a fundraiser. Eleanor turned her teacup a quarter turn and delivered the next line the way you'd deliver a theorem. I spent my whole life buying my seat at that table. Turns out I was only ever renting. The clock in her room was loud. I remember that. Rent comes due every month, forever, she said. The moment you can't pay, the chair's gone, and they act like it was never there. Then she looked at me, and her voice, for the first time in our acquaintance, went gentle. Don't wait until this bed to learn your own arithmetic, girl. You're the best math I've seen in years, and you're doing it for people who round you down. I drove home at midnight with my hands steady on the wheel and something enormous moving under my ribs, slow, like ice breaking up on the lake in March. I opened my laptop at the kitchen table. I want to be precise about what I opened it to do. I did not open it to write a speech to my family. I've watched 100 families give speeches over hospital beds. Speeches are for the speaker. I opened it because that afternoon, between patients, a travel ad had followed me around the internet like a hopeful dog, a woman my age, alone at a ship's rail, gold water, no opinion anywhere in the frame. 11 at night in a hospice parking lot is where I'd first clicked it. And now, at my kitchen table, I clicked the rest of the way. 7 nights, Eastern Caribbean, sailing out of Fort Lauderdale on December 23, San Juan, St. Thomas, St. Martin. There was exactly one balcony suite left, a holiday cancellation, high deck, king bed, a bathtub. I hadn't owned a bathtub in 10 years. With flights, the drink package, the Wi-Fi, all of it, the total came to just under $5,200. I sat there looking at the payment screen, and then I did the thing that still makes my throat tight. I logged into savings and pointed the transfer at the account labeled someday. $9,600 that had been sitting in the dark for 5 years, waiting for a child who was never coming. Someday, it turns out, has a date, if you're brave enough to pick one. I picked December 23rd. I paid in full. The confirmation email arrived with a little air horn graphic, tacky and wonderful, and I sat in my quiet kitchen and smiled for the first time in 9 days. Then I renamed the account. It's called Now. Have you ever been told, politely, sweetly, with a heart emoji, that you didn't count? If you've been the one left off the list, tell me in the comments where you were standing when you found out. I read every single one. And subscribe, because what my family did when they found out where I was spending Christmas, I still don't entirely have words for it. And I was there. I kept the announcement small on purpose, 2 lines in the family thread, 5 days before I flew. Confirmed. I'll be away for the holidays. Enjoy the lake house. You'd have thought I'd announced a felony, Renee replied in under a minute. Away where? 2 question marks, which for Renee is a siren. Paige tried the concerned sister-in-law angle. Is everything okay? This seems sudden. Sudden. They'd had a planning chat about my absence since Halloween. I'd simply agreed with it faster than scheduled. Neil sent nothing, which is Neil. And then my mother called, and I watched her name glow on my counter through 4 rings before I picked up. She didn't ask where I was going. She didn't ask if I was hurt. She said, "People will ask where you are, honey." What am I supposed to tell them? There it was. The whole engine of my family idling in one sentence. Not her daughter, alone in December. The optics of her daughter alone in December. I looked out my window at the parking lot of my apartment complex, at a plastic snowman glowing brave and stupid in the cold, and I felt weirdly calm. Tell them the truth, Mom. Tell them I wasn't invited. Silence on the line. Then, that's not fair, Marin. Nobody said you weren't, and she stopped, because we both knew the next word was welcome, and neither of us could survive her saying it. I told her I loved her. I meant it, which is the inconvenient part of this whole story. Then I hung up and finished packing. They wanted to control where I sat. Fine. They were about to find out exactly where I was, along with everyone else in the county. Here's a thing nobody tells you about deciding to matter to yourself: the logistics are hilarious. I hadn't taken a full week off in 15 years. When I put in for leave, my supervisor read the dates twice and asked if I was having surgery. I bought a white sundress, my first white anything since the wedding, and stood in the fitting room looking at a woman I hadn't seen in a decade. I bought Reef Safe sunscreen, a paperback I'd been meaning to read for 6 years, and a wide straw hat Renee would have called a lot, which is precisely why I bought it. I handed off my patients one by one with notes so detailed the relief nurse laughed out loud. Mrs. Kowalski's daughter cried and hugged me and said, "Good for you, honey. Go." A stranger's daughter, mind you, managed the sentence my own mother couldn't find. Eleanor demanded to see the itinerary, checked the ship's tonnage like she was grading it, and pronounced the whole plan adequate, which from Eleanor was a standing ovation. "It's only for parents now," I told her, deadpan. "So I figure the childless get the Caribbean as a consolation prize." She laughed until she coughed, and then she said, "Send me a postcard from your actual life." I was still smiling when I got home and started to pack. That's when the evening snagged. Top of my dresser, where they've lived for 23 years, my keys. Car key, apartment key, mom's spare, the hospice building fob, and one more, older, heavier, worn smooth at the shoulder. I stood there with the suitcase open and couldn't make my hand move past it. The key is brass, cut by my father's own hand at his workbench the summer I turned 16, with a crooked letter W scratched into the head, because he labeled everything he loved. He'd pressed it into my palm on the lake house porch, closing my fingers over it like something alive. "So you can always let yourself in," he'd said. Not knock. Not call ahead. Let yourself in. For 23 years that key had ridden next to my car key through every version of my life: the wedding, the clinics, the divorce, his funeral. I'd rubbed my thumb over that crooked W in more waiting rooms than I can count. It's the only thing I own that his hands made just for me. And now I stood at my dresser, 39 years old, banned from the door it opens, trying to take it off the ring. I actually tried. Got a fingernail under the coil and everything. Couldn't do it. It felt like unhooking a rib. So I did something that made no sense at all. I dropped the whole ring, brass key and all, into the zip pocket of my carry-on, where it would spend a week in the Caribbean, 2,000 miles from the only lock it fits. I told myself it was habit: you don't leave keys lying around. Neither of those was the reason, and some part of me knew it even then, standing in that bedroom with the snow ticking at the window. Some decisions pack themselves early and ride along quietly until you're ready to make them. That key had a job to do yet. I just didn't know, on December 22nd, that the job wasn't opening anything. December 23rd, Fort Lauderdale, 82 degrees. I walked out of that airport and the heat hit me like forgiveness. The ship was absurd, I mean that as a compliment. 14 decks of lit-up nonsense, a chandelier the size of my car, a man in white gloves who called me Ms. Whitfield and meant it. My suite had a balcony wide enough for 2 loungers and a little table, and when I slid open the door, the ocean was just there, minding its own business, all the way to the curve of the earth. There was champagne on ice with a card, "Welcome aboard. We're glad you're here." I stood on that balcony in my scrubs-colored cardigan and read the card twice. Glad you're here. It rhymed with something, and it took me a second to place it. Then I did, and I had to sit down on the lounger for a minute. We sailed at 4. I stayed at the rail and watched Florida slide backward, the cranes, the condos, the whole continent with my family on it, shrinking to a line, then a smudge, then gone. I had my hand in my bag and realized I was rubbing my thumb over the crooked W the way I do in waiting rooms. Rent, Eleanor said in my head. The moment you can't pay, the chair's gone. Out on the open water the light turned gold and lay down flat on the sea like it owned the place. I took my first photo standing there, just the water, my hand on the rail, no caption in me yet. I didn't post it. I wasn't hiding. I was deciding. There's a difference, and I was about 36 hours from learning exactly how big a difference it was. I won't lie to you about Christmas Eve, because you'd smell it. It was hard. The ship did it up beautifully, garlands on every rail, a choir of crew members singing carols in the atrium, snow made of soap bubbles drifting past the chandelier, and everywhere, families in matching pajamas at the early seating. A dad carrying a sleeping toddler like a sack of sugar. I stood at the atrium rail in my new dress with a glass of wine I wasn't drinking, and for about 90 seconds the whole thing wobbled. Then a voice beside me said, "First holiday alone. You've got the face." She was tall, my age, give or take, in emerald silk, holding her heels in one hand like a woman who'd already won the evening. Farah, an ER doctor from Charlotte, divorced 18 months, at the solo traveler's table by choice. "My ex kept the in-laws," she said, deadpan. "Best settlement I ever negotiated." I laughed for real, the undignified kind. We closed down the late seating with 2 widows from Michigan and a retired tugboat captain who'd cruised alone every Christmas for 11 years and called it my annual custody of myself. Nobody at that table asked me why I wasn't with my family. They asked what I was reading. At midnight I stood on my balcony in the warm dark, ocean hissing along the hull, and checked my phone out of pure muscle memory. The Wi-Fi was working fine, that's the detail I want you to have. Full signal, midnight on Christmas Eve, and from my mother, my brother, and my sister, nothing. Not one message. And that silence, which was supposed to punish me, is what made the next morning so easy. Christmas morning the ship was somewhere south of nowhere, and the sea was the kind of blue that looks rude to describe to people in Wisconsin. I put on the white dress. Farah met me on the top deck with 2 mimosas and an opinion about my hat, and then she took my phone and said, "Stand at the rail. You're going to want to remember being this free." The pictures she took are still the favorite photos of my entire life. Me laughing with my head back. Me barefoot with my coffee. The water impossibly gold behind me. A long shot down the empty morning deck, one woman, one horizon, nobody needing anything from her. I sat with my thumb over the post button for a long moment. I want to be honest about what was in me, because this part matters. It wasn't revenge. If it had been revenge, I'd have written something surgical in the caption, and believe me, I had drafts in my head with scalpels in them. I deleted every one. What I finally typed was just this: "Merry Christmas" from someone who finally spent it exactly where she was wanted. No names, no story, no tags. 11 in the morning, ship's Wi-Fi crawling, that little wheel spinning, and up it went to my regular, unremarkable Facebook, where my whole town lives, church ladies, hospice co-workers, half of Millbrook, and every Whitfield with a phone. I put the phone face down on the lounger and went to breakfast with Farah, and I genuinely, foolishly believed I had posted a photograph of a woman on vacation. By the time we docked in San Juan the next morning, there were 44 messages waiting on that phone. My family had found the photos, and not one of them was writing to say Merry Christmas. I read them on the balcony while San Juan slid up to meet us, pastel and bright, and it was like watching two weather systems collide. The first flood was warm. My coworkers, good for you. Mrs. Kowalski's daughter, 3 crying emojis and you deserve every minute. A cousin in Green Bay I hadn't heard from in 3 years, I don't know what happened but I'm cheering. Women I barely knew from church, I have never once done this and I am 63. The second flood was my family, and the temperature dropped message by message. Renee first, naturally. Wow, real classy on Christmas. Then, 20 minutes later, you couldn't give us one holiday without making it about you. I had to read that one twice. I'd been formally removed from the holiday, and my absence was still somehow about me being present. Paige came next, in full committee chair voice, I hope you're proud. Your mother sat through the Christmas Eve service getting asked why her daughter is on a boat. You've embarrassed her in front of the entire congregation. And there it was again. Not your mother misses you. Not are you okay, alone at sea on Christmas. The congregation. The optics. The seating chart at Trinity Methodist. I scrolled the whole flood twice, standing in the Puerto Rican sun in my straw hat, and I noticed the thing a nurse notices at a bedside when a family gathers around asking all the wrong questions. Not one message, not from my sister, my brother, my mother, asked me a single question about myself. They only asked what I was going to do next, which, if I'm honest, made 2 of us wondering. Neil called that evening as we pulled out of San Juan, and Neil is the family's designated reasonable man, so his voice arrived pre-oiled. Nobody's mad, he opened, which is what people say when everybody's mad. But you've made your point. Take the posts down, maybe put up an apology, doesn't have to be a big thing, and everyone moves on. You're making Mom look bad. I watched the harbor light swing by and gave that sentence the silence it had earned. Walk me through it, I said, calm as a chart review. It's a photo of me, drinking coffee, smiling. There's no caption about anyone. No story. Which part is the attack? He exhaled the way he does when the numbers won't behave. You know exactly what you're doing. Everyone can see you're fine, and they all know you weren't invited, so it looks, he stopped, because there was no way through that sentence that didn't convict somebody. We both heard it. It looks like what it is, Neil, I said. That's the problem. If a picture of me happy embarrasses this family, the problem isn't the picture. He went quiet, and then his voice dropped into something tireder and more honest, and for 1 second I heard my actual brother in there, the one who taught me to skip stones off the dock. Renee's getting questions, Marin. Mom's getting questions. People from church, the neighbors, Aunt Carol. It's becoming a thing. A thing. 6 weeks of secret planning, a family vote, my 36 Christmases, none of that had been a thing. My sunburn was. I told him good night. The phone started buzzing again before I'd set it down, and this time it didn't stop. But the message that broke me that week wasn't from my family. It came at 6 the next morning, docked in St. Thomas, from my coworker Priya, and I knew before I opened it, the way you know when a house goes quiet. Eleanor had died on Christmas night. In her sleep, no pain, the night nurse said, sharp at dinner, gone by morning, which is exactly the exit Eleanor would have graded highest. I sat on my balcony in the early heat with the gulls carrying on over the harbor, and I cried for Eleanor, and for the visitors who never came, and a little, if I'm honest, for the version of me that had planned to be back in time to sit with her. Then Priya's second message arrived. Eleanor had left instructions, because of course she had, and among them was an envelope with my name on it. Priya sent a photo. Inside was a get well card. Eleanor thought sympathy cards were morbid, so she'd bought the most aggressively cheerful one in the gift shop, daisies all over it. And inside that, in schoolteacher cursive gone wobbly, a single line, "Sit down at your own table, girl." I looked at that sentence for a long time. Then I looked at my bag on the chair, with the key ring in the zip pocket, the brass W writing 2,000 miles from its lock. I'd told myself I brought it out of habit. Sitting there with Eleanor's handwriting on my phone and the harbor turning gold, I finally admitted what I think I'd known at the dresser. I hadn't brought the key so I could let myself back in. I'd brought it because some part of me was deciding whether to give it back. Meanwhile, without my permission, my photos had grown legs. A woman from my church had shared the deck picture into a Facebook group called Solo by the Sea, 40,000 members, women who travel alone, with a one-line introduction, "This is my friend's first solo Christmas. Look at her face." By the time we sailed for St. Martin there were hundreds of comments, and I read them in the buffet line like a woman drinking water after a long fever. "Spent last Christmas in my car in the driveway crying. Booking something for next year. Thank you. My family does immediate family only now too. I've been the babysitter for 20 years. Nobody tells you the table you set your whole life can be taken away in one text." Hundreds of them. I had honestly believed, all the way up until that buffet line, that what happened to me was a private family malfunction. It was a pattern. It had a shape so common that 40,000 strangers recognized it on sight. That night Renee called, and I almost didn't pick up. I'm glad I did, because it's the only time in this whole story I heard my sister's actual voice. She was crying, not rage crying, the other kind. "You don't get it," she said. "You post one photo and the whole world claps for you. I haven't slept a full night in 9 years. Being their mom is the only thing I have, when you get to be everything else." I stood there on my balcony holding that sentence and I felt the near miss of really seeing my sister for the first time in years. Then she pulled the door shut again. "So take the posts down. Please. You've made your point." And I gave my family the answer I had never once, in 39 years, said plainly. "No. If you're still with me, thank you." That week hundreds of women were writing to me about holidays spent alone inside their own families. If that's ever been you, put the word table in the comments below. I read every one. Now, about the phone call that came at 6 in the morning and changed everything. The no went through my family like a stone through a greenhouse. Within hours I'd been added back into a group thread, not the tree emoji one, a new one, no name at all, like being summoned to a conference room. A message was waiting, long and formatted, with the unmistakable fingerprints of a committee. I've read enough insurance paperwork to recognize Page's drafting, firm, bloodless, full of phrases like moving forward and family unity. I could hear Neil's edits sanding the corners down. The terms were simple. Delete the posts. Apologize to Renee for the spectacle. Apologize to Mom in person, specified, in person, before the congregation hears any more. And if I declined, the family will have to reconsider your involvement in family matters going forward, including Mom's affairs. Mom's affairs. Let me translate that from committee into English: the medication list in my purse, the cardiology appointments on my calendar, the pill box I fill every Sunday night, the affairs, in other words, that I was the only one managing. They were threatening to fire me from a job none of them had ever once offered to do. It was supposed to be the nuclear option, cutting me out of the caregiving. That's how little they understood what they'd been spending, all those years, without ever noticing the bill. They thought my usefulness was their leverage. And underneath the committee prose, one last line from my mother's number, typed by her own hand. "Please, Marin, just come home." I sat with that one a long time, out on the dark water between islands. They thought they were about to take something from me. None of them had the faintest idea what I'd been carrying, or what it would mean the day I finally set it down. I didn't answer the committee that night. Instead I sat on my balcony past midnight with 2 objects in front of me, doing inventory the way I do it at a bedside. Object 1, my phone, open to my banking app, where the autopay stood loaded for the first of the month, like it had stood loaded 72 times before, $640, lake house loan, taxes, insurance, the machine that kept the porch lights on at a house I was no longer welcome inside. Object 2, the brass key, out of the zip pocket now, lying on the little table, catching the deck lights. 23 years on my ring, a crooked W cut by a man who believed, all the way down, that his family was the kind where a daughter should always be able to let herself in. I'm glad he wasn't there for December. I sat between those two objects like a referee, and I thought about Eleanor's arithmetic, buying, renting, the chair that vanishes the day you can't pay. If I stop paying and the chair vanishes, I thought, then Eleanor was right, and it was never mine. And if I keep paying, then I'm just a woman funding a Christmas she's banned from forever, and calling it love. There was no third option on the table. There never had been. I'd just been squinting for one for 6 years. I didn't decide that night. I want that on the record. The decision, when it came, was made in full daylight, and not by anger. I fell asleep in the balcony chair with the key in my fist. At 6 the next morning, the phone rang. Neil. And this time it wasn't about the photos. Mom fell, he said, delivered with the grim satisfaction of a man arriving with a warrant. We were coming into St. Martin. Through the glass, the harbor slid up to meet us, green hills, sailboats at anchor. She slipped on the back steps last night. This is what happens, Marin. This is exactly what happens when you abandon this family. And here's where being a nurse is a kind of armor they'd forgotten I owned. I didn't panic. I triaged. Is she conscious? Did she hit her head? Who's with her? He faltered. Drama doesn't like intake questions. Conscious, yes. No head strike. Joyce from next door had driven her in. I said I'd call him back, and I called my mother directly. She answered on the second ring, voice shaky but fully, unmistakably herself. Left wrist swollen. X-rays done. Nothing broken. A bad sprain, a splint, ibuprofen, home again before midnight. Joyce got on the line and confirmed every word like the good witness she is. She's fine, honey. Scared herself mostly. I stayed the night, I'm making her breakfast now. I stayed on with Mom for 20 minutes and organized what actually needed organizing. A meal train with Joyce and the church ladies. A follow-up with her regular doctor. My own call every morning at 8. Care, in other words, the real kind. The kind I'm licensed in. Then Neil's next message landed, and I understood the fall had already been converted into currency. Fly home today. Delete everything. Apologize to Renee. Do that and Mom says you're welcome at New Year's. All of it forgotten. This is your last chance to be part of this family. I read it standing at the rail in the St. Martin sun. Welcome. There was that word again. It had a price tag on it now. It always had. I want to be honest with you about the next hour, because the easy version of this story skips it. I looked up flights. That's the truth. St. Martin to Miami, Miami to Madison, wheels down by 10 that night. Doable. Expensive. And for about 40 minutes I sat on my balcony genuinely running it, the cab to the airport, the apology rehearsed on the layover, New Year's at the lake house with everything forgotten. 39 years of reflex is a real thing. You don't unlearn a nervous system on a Tuesday. Some part of me wanted that offer so badly my hands ached. A seat at the table, my mother's kitchen, my nieces and nephews. All I had to do was fly home and resume payments, the apology, the deleted photos, the shrinking, the $640 a month, the whole subscription, and that was the word that stopped the whole machine. Forgotten. I read the offer again, the way I finally read it in the St. Martin sun. Not we're sorry. Not we miss you. All of it forgotten, meaning the photos gone, the questions hushed, the congregation soothed, and me back in my chair as if none of it had happened, on the strict condition that I confirm none of it mattered. They weren't offering to welcome me back. They were offering to erase the only month of my life in which I'd been fully visible. The price of readmission was the disappearance of the evidence, and the evidence was me, happy. I sat back, and something in my chest went very level and very quiet, the way the sea gets before weather. It wasn't an invitation at all, I realized. It was the old contract, retyped, with a Christmas bow on it, and the renewal deadline was today. I found Farah at the coffee bar on deck 5, told her the whole thing, and watched her do what good clinicians do, skip the sympathy, go straight to the exam. She stirred her espresso and asked exactly 2 questions. If she were your patient's family, some other Marin, some other boat, what would you call that message? I didn't even have to think. Leverage. A fall converted into leverage inside 3 hours. She nodded, unsurprised, and asked the second one. And what do you tell families who use leverage on the people taking care of them? I heard my own voice answer with the sentence I have said gently in 100 kitchens, to 100 grasping, frightened families. Love doesn't invoice. The words came out and just hung there over the espresso machine, and I thought I might actually laugh, because I had been on the wrong side of my own best sentence for 6 years. I had let love invoice me monthly. I had confused the bill for the belonging. Eleanor in my head, dry as chalk, buying, renting, arithmetic, girl. Eleanor's daisy card, sit down at your own table. My father's key in my bag, cut so I could always let myself in, and the honest fact, which I could finally hold without flinching, that the house it opened had stopped being that house a long time before anyone sent me a text. Farah watched me arrive somewhere and raised her cup half an inch. There she is, she said. I stood up, walked back to my suite along the sunny side of the ship, closed the door, and did the 3 things I should have done 6 years earlier. I did them calmly, in order, and I'll tell you each one. The first thing, I answered Neil. No speech, no history, no wounds inventoried. I told him Mom was safe, splinted, and fed, that Joyce and I had the real logistics handled, and that I'd be calling her every morning at 8, like always, because I was done performing care but would never be done providing it. I told him the photos stay up. There is nothing in them but me, happy. If that's a scandal, the scandal isn't mine. And then I typed the sentence I'd been carrying since a Wednesday in early December, and sent it before the Wi-Fi could think twice. Renee said Christmas is only for parents now. Okay. Then I'm only for me now. And beneath it, 1 line for my mother to explain however she saw fit, the first of the month arrangement ends today. She knows what that means. The second thing, I called my bank. There's a number on the back of the card, and a soft-voiced young man in a call center somewhere, and a script he has to read twice. Autopay cancelled, effective immediately. The loan, the taxes, the insurance, all 3 lines. 72 payments, 6 years, more than $46,000, ended in under 9 minutes from a deck chair in the Caribbean. He asked if there was anything else he could help me with. I said, you have no idea. He laughed politely, and it was done. The third thing I did slowly. Ship stationery, a real pen, a letter to my mother, private, no copies, no audience, no group thread. I told her the whole truth of the last 6 years, the folder, the promise, the first of every month. I told her I didn't want $1 back and I wasn't telling the congregation a word. And I set the new terms, the only terms there had ever needed to be. I will always show up for you as your daughter. I am done showing up as your staff. I signed it, folded it, and set on top of it the brass key with the crooked W, for the envelope I'd buy in Fort Lauderdale. My father cut that key so I could always let myself in. I was finally doing it. Just not to the house. Let me tell you what it cost, because this is the part the cheering crowd never sees. The moment that autopay died, the lake house started dying with it. Nobody else in my family can carry $640 a month, Neil won't, and Renee can't. Which meant the porch my father built with his own sunburned hands, the dock where I learned to skip stones, the window where every tree I ever decorated stood, would eventually be sold to strangers. In saving myself, I was signing away the last place on earth that still had him in the walls. Both things were true at once, and I let them both be true. That's the whole trick of it, if you want the trick. I stood at the rail with the confirmation email glowing in my hand, and out loud, to no one, to the whole Caribbean, I said, "The lease is up." Then I turned the phone off, all the way off, a black little stone, and got dressed for dinner, and sat down at the solo traveler's table between Farah and the tugboat captain, and for the first time in longer than I can tell you, I ate every bite of dessert. One message had slipped in before the screen went dark, and I'd read it in the elevator. "My mother, Marin, please. Not the house." 6 years of pretending the house paid for itself, and there it was at last, the quiet part, in writing, from her own hand. The last 2 days of that cruise were the quietest of my life, and not because the phone stayed off. A beach like sugar that last afternoon in port, then a long sea day coming home, the whole horizon to myself. When I powered back on, the family thread had burned through its stages: outrage, disbelief, and then, once Mom had been forced to explain to her own children what I'd been paying and why, a strange, sputtering silence. Neil called once more, and his voice had lost its committee finish. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" he asked, and he sounded 15. "Because she asked me not to," I said. "And because I thought paying quietly was what love looked like. We were both wrong. And it's not your fault. And it's not all hers either." Renee sent one long message at 2 in the morning, rambling, defensive, wounded, and threaded through the middle of it, almost hidden, "I didn't know about the money." I swear I believed her. I wrote back once and kept it short. The truth was theirs to carry now. I owed no one an apology, and I wanted none back. My door was open to anyone who came through it as family, and closed to anyone who arrived holding an invoice. On December 30th, the ship slid into Fort Lauderdale at dawn, pelicans escorting us in like tired angels. At an airport shop I bought a padded envelope, and at the post office counter I mailed my mother the letter, with the brass key inside. I stood there a second with my hand flat on the envelope, the way you rest a hand on a patient at the end. The clerk asked if the contents were fragile. "Very," I said. "It'll travel fine." That envelope took 4 days to reach Wisconsin. What my mother did when she opened it, I truly did not see coming. Here's the honest ledger of that winter, because I promised you true, not tidy. The lake house went up for sale in March. Neil ran the numbers and declined. Renee cried and couldn't. I was done, and stayed done, and grieved it anyway. You can be certain and sad at the same time. Nobody tells you that. Aunt Carol stopped speaking to me, informing the family that I had put money over blood, which, from the one relative who never once drove Mom to an appointment, had a certain shine to it. 2 cousins went quiet in public and sent private messages that said, in different words, "You did what the rest of us only talk about." The church ladies whispered for a season, and then a deacon's son got arrested for something actually interesting, and Millbrook moved on, the way congregations always do. Renee never apologized. What she did instead, and I'd decided to understand it as her dialect of a truce, was start sending me photos of the kids again in late January. Josie in her snow boots on the wrong feet. Beckett's lost tooth. I answered every photo warmly and said nothing else. That is where my sister and I live now, a small country, but a real one, with a border we both respect. And the envelope. Joyce told me Mom sat with it at the kitchen table for a long while the day it came. She didn't call me that day, or that week. But when she finally did, the first thing she said wasn't about the money, or the church, or Renee. And the brass key never came back to me. My mother kept it. Wait till you hear why. A Sunday in late February, gray as a nickel, somebody knocked on my apartment door, and it was my mother, holding the old floral cookie tin she's used since before I was born. She'd driven herself 15 minutes, but for her, in winter, that's a voyage. She stood in my little kitchen. She'd never once been inside my apartment, I realized, in the 4 years I'd lived there, and she looked small and brave and terrified. She did not apologize, because women of her generation weren't issued the words. What she said instead was this. Your father gave you that key so you could always let yourself in. She turned the tin around in her hands. I'd been keeping it in my coat pocket, to remind me it was never the house that needed to stay open. It was me. I forgot the house was never the point. Then she asked, like a guest, my mother, a guest with her own daughter, whether she could stay for supper. We ate scrambled eggs and cookies from the tin at my two-chair table, and she told me a story I'd never heard, about my father getting the porch beams wrong the first time, and we laughed, and neither of us mentioned Christmas at all. It wasn't everything. Renee stayed Renee. The church stayed the church. But at my table that night sat a woman learning, at 68, to show up without a seating chart. People can surprise you. Not often enough. This Christmas, 1 year almost to the day after a text message reclassified me as furniture, my apartment held more people than chairs, around 2 tables pushed together under a cloth my father's mother embroidered. Priya and 2 others from hospice, between shifts. Joyce, who brought a ham that outclassed mine and knew it. 2 women from Solo by the Sea, friends now, in real life, one of whom spent last Christmas in her car in a driveway, and this one told the story out loud, laughing. The tugboat captain sent a card from somewhere off Cozumel. And 1 chair we set on purpose, with a full place setting and no name on it, house rule, my house, for whoever needs it, because somebody always needs it, every year. At 6 the doorbell rang, and it was my mother with the blue tin and Josie on her hip, because Renee had dropped them both off. Renee, who waved from the car, which is a sentence I've decided to keep. Mom looked down the length of my crowded, mismatched, glorious table and asked where I wanted her. Anywhere, I said. At my table there is no only. If you're here, you're family. We lit the candles. Someone's pager went off, and we all laughed. And in March I'm sailing again, 5 nights, Western route this time, booked from the account called now. Not to prove anything. Proof was last year. This one's just because the ocean and I have a standing appointment. If you take one thing from my story, take this: a seat you have to keep paying for was never yours. The only table that's truly yours is the one where love doesn't come with an invoice. That's my story. 1 text before Christmas, 1 cabin with an ocean view, and 1 brass key I finally gave back. If someone has ever made you pay rent for a place in their heart, maybe it's time to read your own lease. If this story found you at the right moment, share it with someone who needs it tonight. Drop a comment and tell me about your table. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. I'll see you there.